We are here not to talk politics. We are here to present a future to you. A future of a country that is so rich, endowed, and highly populated, very dynamic, unique in its culture, unique in our tradition, unique in our ethnicity. A country we determine that we make our prosperity possible if only we use that God-given opportunity of diversity for prosperity of Nigerians. We're sure to do that. We're not poor in knowledge. We are not poor in human resources. We are not poor in capital resources. We're only poor in management and leadership. And that is why I ran for president, to help all of us mold the soul of our country in the right direction.
Oh, wonder there is so much to unpack from that speech by that excerpt of a speech by the president. But this morning we have two gentlemen join us. Let's start with Mr. Wole Ogundare, who is a development economist, a financial and management expert. He's CEO Kathana Advisory, financial and management advisory firm. He joins us virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Ogundare. Let me begin with some of the issues that's been raised on the front page of the dailies this morning. The IMF is warning that there is something in the region of $235 trillion of debts all over the world. Nigeria is owing 14 trillion naira, according to the Minister of Works, and that's what the federal government inherited. It's also been revealed to us this morning that we service our debts with something in the region of 2.3 trillion naira. We've done that over the past 6 months. And Nigeria has lost about 8.7 trillion naira in terms of our OPEC quota. What do all these things mean to the average Nigerian, and how impactful, positively or negatively, do you see them being?
Thank you. Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think the challenge for the average Nigerian, in my view, is a bleak future that they see. That is what the average Nigerian sees on a daily basis. They see this bleak future and they are wondering, how can we exist with this kind of future? I mean, look at some of the things that you've highlighted. For the average Nigerian, it's all bad news. And most people have started taking this with a pinch of salt. Oh, that's Nigeria for you. You know, nobody seems to feel there's a way out of it, of this conundrum. So for me, I think that there are a lot of things that can be done in our current state. Maybe when we get to that position, we'll talk about it. For me, my fundamental question is always this: what is the big canvas? What is the big picture? What is the big future we're all looking forward to? And what are all of the moving parts in this jigsaw that we need to start putting in place, you know, to start reversing the trend of this debt? As an example, you know, we looked at the first year earnings or the first half year earnings in Nigeria, you know, nothing to write home about. And a considerable amount, somewhere in the vicinity of about 98% of our retained earnings as a country, has been used to pay debts. And I also see a headline that you gentlemen talked about, just shortly now, about the jumbo pay of our legislators being ratified. How does that play out within the context of all the global, loans and all of the repayments that Nigeria has to face? So these are some of the very burning issues for me in the minds of Nigerians, and how, we found ourselves in this position, which again is a conversation I think we should also have sometime today, because I have some ideas to share on where all of this is coming from and how we can actually exit this conundrum we find ourselves in.
Well, perhaps,
Thank you.
Perhaps we can begin that conversation, because there's quite a lot to talk about, but let's take them as they come. You are a development economist, so I'd like you to speak from that perspective. Do we have the structures, soft infrastructure in the country to take Nigeria out of this debt? It's a long time coming. It's a build-up of so many years, possibly even decades. Consequently, one can say that the structures have either failed or they are being made to fail one way or the other. So do we have the soft infrastructure to deal with the perennial challenge of debts such that we can stop getting debt? Yes, the federal government has said that there is no thinking along the line of collecting any further debts anytime, borrowing any money anytime within the nearest future. But do we have the infrastructure to pay back and not leave the inheritance of these debts to the future generation?
Very good question. Let me take us back a bit. In 2013, about 10 years ago, the federal government, via the Ministry of Planning, commissioned a project called the Nigerian National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan. That plan has been updated in 2023. It's if you Google NIIMP, if you search it, it's right there. Very comprehensive plan. That plan states that as of 2013, Nigeria needed 2.9 trillion US dollars to upgrade her current infrastructure that you've mentioned. Now, that is not even the crux of the matter. The main crux of the matter was that as at that 2013, our total infrastructure stock, which means the total cost of all our infrastructure, power, transport, water, mining, agriculture, security, vital registration, all of those things put together only contributed about 25% of our GDP as at 2013. Today, 10 years later, if you check those two figures, it's still somewhere around 25–30% of GDP. From a developmental economics point of view.
My apologies, if you can hear me,
yes.
sincere apologies.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm not talking about the hard infrastructure. I'm talking about soft infrastructure that can help us out. Policies, decisions, issues like that. We'll come to the hard infrastructure. It's certainly a concern. But I'm talking about the soft infrastructure that can prevent corruption, that help us to pay back some of these debts in such that we do not leave it to the future. We'll come to the hard infrastructure. But the soft infrastructure and all those things that can help us exit these debts, do you think we have it strong enough?
So we have, one of the things I usually tell people when it comes to soft infrastructure policies and stuff like that, we have all of those policies. It's why I mentioned the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan. We have policies, macro, micro. The problem with a lot of our policies has been around the inconsistent nature of our policies. Today there's a policy, attracting a certain thing. Tomorrow there's another policy countering that particular issue, policy inconsistencies. And you see, for me, it is because the various people who have led Nigeria have been looking for various ways to navigate out of all the challenges. So they're constantly trying various things. So for me, the problem or the solution doesn't really lie with, the availability or non-availability of policies. It is creating the policies and being consistent in the implementation of the policies. Now, The thing that makes your policy work, because it's one thing to create the policies, the thing that will make the policy work is the hard infrastructure. So once we create, the micro policies and, we try to implement it in various ways and it keeps on failing, the reason why I believe it keeps on failing is an absence of hard infrastructure over the last 40, 50 years to enable people to say, look, these policies that we've created, it's now time to implement it. You need something to implement it. It's like driving a car. You've created the manual for the car. Now you need to drive the car, following the manual that you've created to drive the car. That is where the challenge lies. So it's not really with the policies, because implementing the policies, that has been inconsistent, primarily because the car that needs to be driven is in a bad state.
I'm going to follow up on that, Mr. Gundari, but very quickly, closely related to Ayo's last question, is what President Tinubu will be pushing for at the UN General Assembly, and one of which, according to our correspondent, is fair financial practices for developing economies. And I'm wondering how that will play out because of what we see back home, where Nigeria, along with other African countries, are the forefront of receiving grants or loans from these international financial institutions for development of our human capital and infrastructure. So really, is the president on a strong pedestal to seek fair global financial practices from the West?
So the question is, in Nigeria, are we practicing fair financial practices? Look, I like context a lot. If you look at Nigeria, people within the ages of 0 to 24 constitute 63% of its population. Therefore, the use of ICT has deepened, all of these loan providers. You see a lot of young people taking all sorts of loans and not being able to repay. The problem is not really, for me, it doesn't sit with, looking for fair financial practices and looking for additional loans and all of those things that, we're talking about. The challenge for me is structural. And you see, whenever I look at Nigeria's number one problem, which sits around our lack of forex, which has put us in this problem, dollar is currently increasing. We import a lot as well. The ability to produce goods in Nigeria at a certain cost is challenged. All of these things for me are the fundamental issues. On the global arena, talking about fair financial practices and all of those things takes a back seat for me as a person, because there are other ways, because all of that I see it as around financial engineering. There are other ways to carry out financial engineering when you're caught up in this type of conundrum. Nigeria as a country has been collecting loans, grants, ODAs for years. My question is, how have those things been applied within the country so far? And you and I know the answer. Those things haven't been applied properly in Nigeria over time. So still continuing with those conversations and ignoring the real socioeconomic conversations that we need to have and build a very, very good base to say, look, based on this base that we have as a country, this is who we are. What are the key priorities for us today? I don't think that is a key priority for the country in terms of coming out of where we are as a country.
And in terms of financial re-engineering of the country in relation to the soft infrastructure that we have, which ones should be retained and which ones should be discarded with, such that we can be less dependent on those grants and loans from the international finance institutions?
Great question. So one of the things I checked between 2016 and 2019, 4 years, I checked diaspora remittances, just the monies that Nigerians in diaspora were sending home. The total, according to the World Bank and the CBN, was about $68 billion US. in 4 years. Just these monies that people send home, you know, and this is what they could account for. We all know how Nigerians send, some will send cash. Now, in those same 4 years, Nigeria, oil and non-oil, we did not generate 68 billion US dollars. We did not. So if you ask me, what is the low-hanging fruit? And you see, the first thing I checked again was which countries are really, really looking for, you know, diaspora remittances and converting it into FDIs for use by the federal government. I saw India was doing it, China was doing it, Rwanda is doing it. There are several countries doing it. It's re-engineering. And for me, why would Nigerians offshore, you know, take that route? Because I heard the coordinating minister of economy, I think minister of steel, Wale Edun, talk about this a while ago. Why would Nigerians want to go that route? They just need to have trust and confidence in the current government. That is a very, very low-hanging fruit for me, and a very, very good way to re-engineer our financial doldrum. Imagine if Nigeria could find a way to convince a lot of our rich Nigerians, and there are a lot of rich Nigerians offshore, to convince a lot of them to invest in certain key infrastructure in a prioritized manner. And those same infrastructure, soft or hard, are the ones that will create the maximum impact. Imagine if we could convince them to repatriate 68 billion US dollars per annum in a structured manner, and Nigerians have the money. Just imagine it. A lot of the challenges we're having today in setting up required infrastructure at the state, regional, and federal levels will immediately begin to move past those challenges. That for me is a very, very low-hanging fruit that hasn't been, the surface hasn't even been scratched, even though we have an infrastructure fund. The surface hasn't been scratched.
Let me comment, Nelta here. That statement you made just now, the remittances converted to FDIs, that's, as you say, that's one of the lowest hanging fruits that the government can ride on, but is to get to convince the Nigerians out there to begin to do this and in a structured manner. But that will lead me to something that we played earlier in the soundbite we played, the president talking about Nigeria not being poor in resources, and the resources there being both physical, mineral, and human resources. He said, in his words, Nigeria is poor in leadership and management. Now, when you say in a structured manner, that points to the fact, how do we get to that point where we can, knowing that this is where we are poor, is it that there are no good leaders or managers in the Nigerian system that can handle these policies that you say policies are there, but the inconsistencies in implementation are the problem? So where is the challenge that needs to be taken out so that we can move forward?
So there are two sides to this question. You'll notice every country has monetary policies and they have fiscal policies, because this conversation will take me towards, again, the hard infrastructure. You see, our current state of having 25–30% of infrastructure stock relative to our GDP is the #1 problem. We have a structural problem. Therefore, a lot of our minerals cannot be converted, you know, within Nigeria. So that's why even today, at its most basic, we export crude and we import fuel at its most basic. Same goes right across a number of things. We keep on exporting raw materials and importing finished products, primarily because our infrastructure stock as a function of our GDP is poor, which is why I started off, you know, talking about the Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan prepared, where Nigeria was said to require 2.9 trillion US dollars as of 2013, you know, for 30 years. It's a 30-year master plan. The updated version in 2023, we still very much need about 2.3 trillion US dollars. And the updated plan says in the first 5 years, between 2023 and 2027, 2028, we need to spend an average of 150 billion US dollars per annum across the whole country to update our infrastructure. That tells me something, that the conversations we should be having today should rest around how do we want to move from 25% to 30 to 35 to 40 to 45 and so on and so forth. That is the conversation that will help convert a lot of what the president is saying from mere talk into actual reality and productive things that Nigerians can sell, export, consume, use it to generate forex. I said there are two sides. On the other side of it, if you ask yourself that on the monetary side, what is the fundamental function of the CBN? What are their regulatory mandate? The number one thing you will see is maintaining the foreign reserves of the country. That's the first thing you see if you check the CBN website. We don't have those foreign reserves to start with. How do you get the foreign reserves? Find a way to upgrade your infrastructure, hard infrastructure, and use it to, in a productive manner, to generate the income you need. A lot of things around unemployment, all of those things will begin to, die a natural death if Nigeria starts to become anywhere near a productive economy that we are actually capable of. We have the leaders in Nigeria. We just need to be having the right conversation around the right things to be doing. You'll notice over the last 8 years, we've played a lot around monetary policies and all of those things. That is not the way to the utopian land that we're looking for as a country. It's not playing around with monetary policies. A lot of it lie around the fiscal policies, soft policies, primarily around the government expenditure on capital investments in this hard infrastructure.
Okay, let me come back here into our studio in Abuja. We have Mr. Adewumi Akinpelu, who is the MD CEO of QSM Integrated Services Limited, former Secretary General of the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors and a fellow as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now we've been talking infrastructure, soft infrastructure, but I know that your expertise is in the hard infrastructure. But let's just weigh in a little bit on the soft infrastructure in terms of human resources and what we have, and based on what the president said, and also the fact that Mr. Gundar in his closing statement talked about updating our infrastructure. We need about $168 million annually to upgrade our physical infrastructure. How do we get through this?
Thank you very much. Very good question. Like Mr. Ogundari said, the NIPPP that he referred to was done in 2013, like he said. When you said soft infrastructure, we have social infrastructure and hard infrastructure. That's economic infrastructure. I mean, let me break it down into layman. When you say hard infrastructure, that is, economic infrastructure like transportation, telecommunication, and all the power, So like he said, I think the federal government, we should now walk the talk by making sure that we come with homegrown, policy that will drive our infrastructure. Yes, we have deficit infrastructure. There's gap. So how do we go about it? Is the federal government will try and retain those social infrastructure like school, agri, and what have you, and again, consign the economic infrastructure to the private sector. And for you to attract private sector, government must come with policies that will be, investment friendly and guarantee safety of investment. Like what is started, even the diaspora people, they will not want to come and invest their money in infrastructure. If there's no guarantee, there must be guarantee of their investment. There must be safety of their investment and repatriation of proceeds from such investment. So what that means is that we need legal, institutional and legal and financial framework. Like the Procurement Act needs to be reviewed. Some of our act needs to be reviewed. ICRC Act has to be reviewed. That will give comfort, minimum comfort to the investor, because fund is like water. Water gravitates to where there's least resistance. They will not want to bring their money if there's no guarantee. I think what Mr. President should be speaking to at the UN General Assembly is to assure the diasporans that bring your money in. I'm going to give you sovereign guarantee because they are Nigerians.
Okay, so Akinpelu, we will take a moment, and when we come back, we'll get back to this matter of providing the security needed so that these infrastructure and the investment can flow into the country.
Exactly.
But that'll be in a moment. Don't go away.
The ministry inherited a total of 2,604 projects worth 14 trillion naira and for 18,000 kilometers of roads. That's what we inherited. And between when we came on board and now, I think about 4 trillion has been paid. And so there is the balance of 10 trillion. Now, this 10 trillion, we have defined sources that could fund up to 4 trillion. Some of these projects have lasted for 20 years, some 10 years. In fact, in most cases, they are never appropriated throughout, every tenure. And so I went to seek Mr. President's nod so that I will be able to terminate some of the projects that have stayed up to 10 years without any defined source of funding. But the good news is that Mr. President has approved that there should be what is called a coastal route. This coastal route is going to run all the way from Port Harcourt, crossing many cities, north, south, west, central, and then end in Lagos. We have another cheering news of a superhighway that is being constructed under PPP from Abuja to Lagos, 460 kilometers. We've concluded 9 routes for concessioning. We have selected about 17 for Mr. President to approve for us to start the due process on concessioning.
Yeah, Mr. Akinpelu, welcome back. We still have Mr. Akinpelu here in the studio we're talking about the infrastructure. Mr. Akinpelu, before we went on that break, you were looking at the need to tie the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure. You talked about concessioning the hard infrastructure, which is like the transportation and all of that, to the private sector. But all of that looks as if there's a problem, because one would think that we have all manner of institutions in this country that should weigh in on this. We have NIPS, for instance, National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, and there's nobody that is in government, so to speak, that hasn't passed through one level or the other of NIPS. We have the Institute of Engineers, we have quantity surveyors, all manner of institutes, but yet we seem to be failing. Again, back to what the president said earlier about, the soundbite we played, we have a leadership and management challenge. How can that be?
Simple in the sense that all you need to do is to ensure that you domicile even the design of all our infrastructure. It's too expensive. I'm coming. How do we address that? Is to express that political will. Lack of political will is what is, messing up all our policies. Like you mentioned NIMS. In NIMS, every year, participants turn out researches. Even during my set, we turn out researches that you need to domicile some of these policies by engaging Nigerian professionals to drive it. And it takes political will. Then number 2, cost of governance. We address what Mr. Ogundare was saying. Cost of governance must be brought down. Now, coming back to infrastructure, what we need to do is to, make private sector to come in. And for the private sector to come in, ICRC Act must be reviewed, Procurement Act must be, reviewed, so that you will now concession some of the infrastructure into the private sector. Anything that has to do with economic infrastructure should be given away, and Nigerians should be ready to pay for it. Like the Honorable Minister said, that some of the road is going to be told, and that is the way to go. The Honorable Minister of Works is an engineer. I'm happy that we have somebody who is an engineer there. He has been advocating for rigid pavement, that is using concrete to construct some of our roads. Good. Private sector will come in if they say that the design is durable and it will guarantee return on their investment. So quickly, take home. 1, institutional reform, like I said, legal reform, and financial reform. And government, not all contracts, not all projects can be concession to PPP. There are some that might not be viable. That is where the government can come in form of co-financing of what we call, viability gap funding. Government should encourage that. Government should be able to give, guarantee to investors. And government should come and make sure that whatever money they are bringing in to invest, proceeds from such investment can be easily repatriated. So it's a matter of political, will. And we have a president that is showing that.
This political will, before we went to that break.
There's a one, and also the government should take the bull by the horn. Because MDAs, they are used to awarding contract. They are not too comfortable with PPP. That is one thing I want to point out. If the government is serious, the investors will have to come in, either domestic or foreign, investors. And you have to remove this government bureaucracy, all this corrupt practice, all this human element, corruption, so that the investors will be assured they need comfort to bring in the money.
Just real quick, my colleagues are going to ask you a question, but before they come in, you were saying something about the sovereign guarantees.
Yes.
Is that what you mean, or is that part of the political will you're implying?
Exactly.
Sovereign guarantees to Nigerians in the diaspora?
Yes, that one is because they are Nigerians. Government over the years might have been feeling reluctant to give foreigners sovereign guarantee, because if there is default, some of the government property might be seized, it might be, but they are Nigerians. They can easily, be given sovereign guarantee that bring your money. We give you guarantee that your investment is safe. There's, open policy in contract award. There is guarantee in contract enforceability. That is what I mean by legal reforms. That if there's any infraction, either on the part of the party, the government, or the investor, you can easily go to the court to seek redress. So that is what I mean by legal, reform. And then the financial reform. Government should be able to have a kind of infrastructure fund that if there's any gap, because of lack of time, not all projects are viable by the time you do your feasibility study, but government should be able to give a kind of, co-financing something. That's another thing government can, do.
Yeah, Mr. Akinpelu, speaking of sustainability in government policy, particularly as it has to do with public procurement, there is a brewing disagreement between the Minister of Works and contractors for road projects over what seems to be a professional disposition towards how to do the job. That's the use of concrete technology on the one hand, where the contractors would rather continue with asphalt because of what they think would be a higher cost, on government finances if they had to go the way of concrete technology. How does this affect public procurement? How do you weigh in on this?
Like I said, it's a kind of innovative idea that the minister is bringing in. I support that idea because of the condition of our soil, especially in the southern part, southeast and south, south. The soil condition is bad there, and there's no way you can be using asphalt, pavement. That is what we call flexible, pavement. The rigid pavement, will be fine to do that using concrete. And how to go about that is very simple. One, government needs to now look for areas where we are going to get quarries. Because when you are talking of rigid pavement, that is concrete road, 60% of material you need will come from quarry. Stone base you need, granite you need, the chippings you need, the cement, stone dust you need to do this construction will come from quarry. Government can give licenses. So, Federal Ministry of Works can be given that, advantage. Have quarry that will be turning out the material you need for this one. And the good news is that BOA is now trying to say is going to bring down the cost of cement for about 3,000. So these are the things that government should look at. Because of time, going to the need, I think what Honorable Minister should do is to call all the professionals in the built environment, QS, engineers, architects, to go and brainstorm on how to implement that as policy. It's a novel idea, and I'm in support of that idea because it will now bring down the cost. By the time you give query, in the 6 geopolitical zone to the Federal Minister of Works. And also, we need to domicile our design. Infrastructure is too expensive in terms of finance and cost and scope. Most nations develop their infrastructure using their construction professionals. Nigerian government has several professional bodies in the built environment: architect, engineer, QS, town planner, name it.
But Mr. Kikpelu,
government should challenge it.
Mr. Kikpelu, in the long run, which is cheaper, the asphalt technology or concrete technology? And
concrete, super.
In the long run or in the medium term?
In the long run, in concrete, rigid pavement, rigid pavement is better. Initial cost might be high, but when you look at the life costing of the pavement, you will discover that concrete pavement is cheaper. Initial capital outlay might be high. So now address that is what I'm saying, that what Minister of Work should do is to approach the federal government, concession some quarries in notable strategic, nations throughout the geopolitical zone. Because 60% of material you need for rigid pavement, we have it here. We have it. When you are talking of rigid pavement, majorly you are talking of pre-mixed concrete, design concrete, and what are the components of concrete? You are talking of granite, you are talking of cement, you are talking of... So we have it here. It's cheaper. The Honorable Minister knows what he's doing.
Well,
and that is the way to go.
Yes, interestingly, the 14 trillion naira debt. Well, let me come to you, Mr. Gundari. Interestingly, the 14 trillion naira debt that the minister was talking about was only for his own ministry, and that's not to say that that's all of the debt that we, of course, it's information that is available to you as well. But you are also trying to talk about infrastructure deficits. The other time, over the years, we've heard over and over again, a number of people come out and tell us that we need X amount of money every year for quite a number of years to be able to catch up in terms of infrastructure. And I'm not also unaware, you are as well, I'm sure, that we have infrastructure, abandoned projects all over the place. Very, very many of them, federal projects, state projects, and all of that. One of which is, and fundamentally speaking, so, is the Ajaokuta project. How do we catch up with all of these things? Because without infrastructure, you talked about that plan, that infrastructure plan. How does that infrastructure plan you mentioned the other time, how does it factor in all of these abandoned projects, this Ajaokuta project and so many other projects like that all over the nation, both federal and state government owned?
Thank you very much. So for me, it's simple. Every single project, look, run them through a standardized framework for prioritizing projects. What do I mean by that? Every single project must have a strategic fit. They must have the required economic impact. The financial health of that project must be assessed. The social welfare of that project must be looked at. The challenge with a lot of the projects that we usually invest in is we don't run them through these kinds of frameworks. So for instance, is that project in line with the regional development objectives, as an example? What is the GDP contribution of that project? What is it? How will it be financed end to end? Is there a fundamental need for the project? Are there clear social benefits, for the project? We need to look at all of these things per project. Abandoned, about to be started, being conceptualized. The moment you go this route, you will only invest in projects that contribute and have the required impact, on the socioeconomy. Not, just setting up projects just for the fun of it. We've seen, some states, build certain projects and, the thing is covered in cobwebs, the next number of years. And you're wondering, why did you spend money on this? With the Ajaokuta one you mentioned, I mean, it has gone.
Just a second, Mr. Ogundari. Who should be asking these questions that you've raised? Because you know as well as I do that a good number of times, maybe be the president or the state governor, will come in and, in most cases, stop the projects initiated by the previous administration and start their own and stuff like that. We have them in various shades in every industry, the road project, bridge project, whatever it is, a good number of them. So who should be asking these questions in a way that, irrespective of which government comes into office, that project is not abandoned?
Again, that's a good question. Let me give you my response to that, and I'll use the infrastructure master plan for this. For the infrastructure master plan, there was a need to create an infrastructure delivery unit and formulate and pass an NIIMP Act for continuity, which is what you're talking about, and then communicate same in a very broad manner to any and everybody, across the world. There's also the need to create a governance model. For me, these things are the things that ensure that whatever it is you're doing is consistent after having run it through, a framework to really, really determine how this will contribute and the sort of impact it will create. So for me, the NAS has a major role to play in all of this, in saying that, look, over the next number of years, this is now an act. It will be difficult for any government just to come in and say, look, we're discontinuing it, because they can actually prove that this project is contributing, to the economy in the way in which it should contribute. The challenge in Nigeria over the last 40, 50 years has been ensuring that we have a continuity in government projects, which is why I use the example of those things that we tried to do when we were preparing that National Infrastructure Master Plan. I say we because I was involved.
Yeah, well, you see, how that will all play out eventually is something that a good number of Nigerians will be waiting to see. You talked about the National Assembly, and that's quite the, institution to get some of these things into place. But then, those who also believe that with the political interests and all of those things, the wheel of governance sometimes move too slowly. But for now, gentlemen, we have to thank you for the privilege of having you here this morning. Wole Ogundari is a development economist, financial and management expert, CEO, Kathana Advisory, a financial management advisory firm. Thank you so much for your time. We've also had Mr. Adeomi Akinpelu, MD and CEO, QSM Integrated Services Limited. He's former Secretary General of the Nigeria Institute of Quantity Surveyors. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning.
Thank you.